Welcome back to Badass Woman 50 Plus. I am Robin Lane, psychotherapist, producer, director. This is a pro-age show, and as a woman of 86 years of age, what other kind of show could you be expecting? The mission of this show is to take the fear out of aging by being role models for women younger than ourselves. We offer relevant information on how to turn aging into a positive experience, and to that end, we also share our personal stories. Our hope is to inspire you to become your best personal self, which is our kind of a badass.
I am Natalie H. Rogers, MSW, CSW, actress, author, psychotherapist, and the founder of Talk Power, a panic clinic for public speaking workshops and Stop That Stutter. I am an age mysterious lady, author of the book Talk Power, the mind-body way to speak without fear. On our show, Badass Women 50 Plus, although we are very serious about what we say, we also like to entertain. So, don't be surprised if you find yourself laughing right after a very, very serious and thoughtful moment.
Today's program will seriously digress from our usual format. This show has taken us out of our comfort zone of women's lifestyle issues and aging into the far broader arena of racism. America's history in this area is for the most part painful, ugly, and unresolved. And that is why it is back in the forefront. The deeper that Natalie and I have delved, the more that we have learned. Now, a badass woman can be of any color, but as Natalie and I are white women, the anti-racist muscle that we hope to help you bulk up on belongs to us white women. And I am sure that we all agree that a badass woman of any age, especially 50 plus, should be an anti-racist. But as you will see, what that entails is a hell of a lot more complex than meets the eye. So let's begin with the backstory from our generation. Yeah? In the spring of 1963, Bobby Kennedy, who was considered a great liberal, met with renowned writer James Baldwin. Here is actor Leland Gant quoting him.
I remember when the ex-Attorney General, Mr. Robert Kennedy, said, "It is conceivable that in 40 years in America, we might have a Negro president." Now that sounded like a very emancipated statement to white people. But they were not in Harlem when that statement was first heard. They did not hear the laughter and bitterness and scorn with which that statement was received. From the point of view of the man in the Harlem barber shop, Bobby Kennedy had only got here yesterday, and now he's already on his way to the presidency. We were here for 400 years, and now he tells us that maybe in 40 years, if you're good, we may let you become president.
When I was 18, a girlfriend and I hitched across the country. It was a safe time. It was the early 50s, especially for girls like us. Anyhow, one night we wound up in a small town in Mississippi, and nothing was open, so we wandered around, and we finally came upon a large house with a beautiful porch and several comfy couches. And thinking nothing of it, we lay down and we went to sleep. And in the morning, a woman stood over us, and we told her that we'd been traveling, we needed a place to sleep, and that her place looked great. She said, "Listen, y'all, you go get something to eat, and then you wire your parents for money so you don't continue to stay on private property. My servant will show you the way." The servant, a word that I'd only heard in British films, did so. And when we got to the cafe, we asked her to join us. Suddenly, she gave us a look of horror, and she fled. I'd grown up in Bed-Stuy, where whites lived on streets with trees and brownstone houses, and blacks lived on streets that ran under the shadow of the elevated train. We took that for granted. And one of my friends the elegant dancer Arthur Mitchell, destined to found the Dance Theater of Harlem, told me about the problem that he was having trying to rent an apartment. On the phone, he'd be invited to see the place, and then when he would show up, they would take one look at him and they would say, "Sorry, rented." So I was not completely in the dark about the de facto apartheid of New York. Arthur was my friend. I was angry about the unfairness of it, but for a pretty white girl where doors readily opened, it was easy to put it out of my mind. Mississippi was another story. It was an in-your-face Jim Crow, white signs only everywhere. But instead of being more on the alert for racism in my hometown and in myself, the South actually made it easier for me not to be. I could comfortably split the nation into a them and an us. I could convince myself that because we didn't do what they did, we didn't have men in white hoods running around burning crosses on lawns, ergo, the South was bad and we were good. After the March on Washington, I thought, aren't I great? I have done my part, and for others. But 1 year later, when President Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act outlawing the practices that many of the states had of restricting African Americans from voting, it finally dawned on me how truly personal this was. This directly affected me because in the final analysis, that restriction, well, it invalidated my vote. Now, in case you're thinking, what is this woman going on about? It's ancient history. Yeah? In spite of Johnson's efforts and because of the record black voting turnout that we saw in 2008, by 2010, 30 states introduced new voter suppression laws. And by 2016, 14 states had passed them. Back in the day, my choice of high was pot, as it was for many of my friends. We would smoke indoors, we'd smoke out on the street, we'd smoke wherever we could. And none of us were ever given a second glance. Now, do you think a black person sitting on the stoop smoking pot would not be questioned? Well, actually, the odds are that they would wind up going to prison. Just look up the statistics. Now, speaking of prisons, the American Legislative Exchange Council, also known as ALEC, a powerful not-for-profit group comprised mostly of male legislators and members of the private sector who draft legislation for distribution to state governments. ALEC has drafted the toughest sentencing laws on the books, like mandatory minimums for non-violent drug offenders and the 3 strikes you're out. And here's the twist. ALEC has also been very successful in creating private for-profit prisons. 2 of its private sector divisions, CCA, Corrections Corporation of America, and the GEO Group, are the largest private prison firms in the nation. And since the year 2000, private for-profit prisons have increased their incarceration rate by close to 50%. Yet the overall prison population has only increased by 9%.
Corporate sponsors spend a fortune lobbying to make cell phone usage punishable. What's wrong with cell phones? Well, if you can't use a cell phone, a phone call from a private prison phone is so exorbitant that it can cost as much as $10 to $17. Now, wouldn't you guess that corporate sponsors members of ALEC control 80% of all private prison phone companies, like Securus and Global, Telink? Bottom line, for the profit private prison phone systems, it's a $1.2 billion industry. You have to be pretty naive not to realize that somebody is making a hell of a buck on the back of blacks. I'll say it again. Prison business is big business.
Historian and scholar Ibram X. Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, makes it clear that any analysis that describes inferior outcomes for Black Americans is racist. An anti-racist analysis would make clear that the problem is not that of Black Americans, but the policies that put that racial group at a distinct disadvantage. He goes further in arguing that action must be taken if you want to call yourself an anti-racist.
If you refuse to send your child to a local public school, Robin, because the population is predominantly African American, that choice is racist. The anti-racist position would be to realize that if you don't enroll your child, it's your responsibility to learn about the inequality that affects that school.
Natalie, anti-racist is where being a badass comes in. Badass women, they're savvy. We know that for black and white folks to come together, the conversation that this country has never had must take place. Talking together about race is discomforting, but isn't it time that we got comfortable with the uncomfortable?
Well, Robin, I would feel uncomfortable, but I'd feel even more uncomfortable if I didn't say anything, as I kept quiet in the past. The time is now to speak out and take action.
Oh, yes, Natalie, how right you are. Look, throughout this program, we have been stressing how racism is still the driving force creating inequality and unfairness in every sector, whether it's politics, criminal justice, education, income, home ownership. And now that I personally have finally begun to ask some uncomfortable questions of my black girlfriends, they tell me about the humiliation and the disrespect that they experience on a regular basis. When it's time to vote, we have to make sure that we take a good, hard look at our candidate's history and know that she is an anti-racist. Because truth be told, none of us can any longer claim ourselves to be an anti-racist without doing something to help to level the playing field.
Well, Robin, we're coming to our close, so remember, we're on the last Tuesday of every month.
Before signing off, actress Chantel George will deliver And Still I Rise by Maya Angelou.
You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may try me in the very dirt, but still like dust, I'll rise. Does my sassiness upset you? Why are you beset with gloom? Because I walk like I got oil wells pumping in my living room. Just like moons and like suns with the certainty of tides. Just like hope springing high, still I rise.